Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the Noon News from Montana's news leader.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us here on the Noon News. I'm Samantha Sullivan. Well, early this morning, Governor Steve Bullock finally pulled the trigger on what many folks had been expecting, but maybe not quite believing: his campaign for President of the United States. Bullock is one of over 20 Democrats to announce he will compete for the party's 2020 nomination to challenge President Trump. Bullock began the campaign with a launch video at 4 o'clock this morning. He also met with select Montana media at his presidential campaign office in downtown Helena. This morning he was fielding questions on everything from the campaign to his stands on the environment, money in politics, and foreign policy. On his first official campaign swing for president, the two-term Democratic governor is heading off to Iowa this week. That's the site of the first presidential nominating primary next February. In that first campaign video released this morning, Bullock zeroed in on one of his main issues: the influence of money in politics, and said it's a corrupting influence that is squashing the American dream. In another interview this morning with CBSN, Bullock says he doesn't believe the president is a good role model and that division in our country is getting out of control.
We've hit this point where, the divisiveness and the discourse, forget about D.C. Read your Facebook feed. Talk to anybody around a Thanksgiving dinner. This isn't the country I want to hand off to my kids.
Now, Bullock is also pitching himself as the only Democratic candidate who has won an election in a state won by Donald Trump in 2016. Well, meanwhile, another big announcement in the Montana political scene coming yesterday.
Not only Helena, not only Billings, not only Missoula, not only Great Falls, Montana needs representation. And I'm going to go there. I'm going to visit with them, I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to take their issues and make their issues my issues for Washington.
Helena Mayor Wilmot Collins officially launched a campaign for Senate on Monday in downtown Helena. He is the first Democratic candidate to file for that race. If he wins the nomination, he will likely face Republican Senator Steve Daines. Collins gained national attention back in 2017 when he won the race for mayor, becoming Montana's first African-American mayor. Collins came to Montana in the 1990s as a refugee from the Civil War in Liberia. Collins says his campaign will focus on issues like reforming the campaign finance system, expanding health care coverage, and improving veteran services. Montana, along with 43 other states and territories, have filed a lawsuit alleging price fixing among more than 100 different generic drugs. The lawsuit claims a broad conspiracy among 20 generic drug manufacturers to manipulate prices and reduce competition. In some state cases, the DOJ says coordinated price increases were over 1,000%. The lawsuit seeks damages, civil penalties, and court orders to restore competition to the generic drug market. Montana may house migrant children separated from their parents. State officials are considering Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls as a temporary emergency shelter for children who enter the United States illegally without a parent. Malmstrom would only be used if there's an urgent need for space. The situation won't impact military readiness. Well, frustration across the state as Governor Steve Bullock says no to a popular drunk driving bill. The Yellowstone County Attorney is now speaking out, furious as Bullock vetoes the bill to require mandatory prison time for fifth-time DUI offenders. However, the governor believes the approach of the bill, which passed the House with an overwhelming majority, is not the right approach. MTN's Andrea Lutz tells us how lawmakers and supporters plan to move forward.
At a time when Montana's DUIs were among the highest in the country, Governor Steve Bullock took office as then Attorney General. Most can agree Montana's drunk driving epidemic needs change.
But they need to be dealt with. And what we currently have isn't doing it.
So this session, freshman Republican Representative Bill Mercer launched a bill to make prison time a part of mandatory punishment for those who get their fifth DUI.
This legislation was designed to say public safety demands that we treat this person differently than we did in those initial 4 attempts to try to modify behavior.
His bill had the support from the House and Senate and Yellowstone County Attorney Scott Twido.
These are the functioning drunk drivers. Their BACs are not like around the threshold level. They're like 3, 4, 5 times the level.
Many were sure the legislation would also get the signature from Governor Bullock, but it didn't. Bullock says the cases of DUI offenders go to the Montana Department of Corrections, where each case is handled differently. In most cases, treatment is the focus. And Bullock says the evidence-based intervention is working, with DUIs at a 4-year downward trend.
Where are you going to draw the line?
Still, Twido and Mercer believe it's not enough.
I mean, this seemed like a very rational point to say this is a person who's already failed to modify behavior after 4 previous attempts. If the 5th and 6th DUIs are too low a threshold to require some term at state prison, then what is it?
While Bullock says more can be done to curb Montana's drunk driving problem, he says this bill was a step backward from criminal justice reform. In Billings, Andrea Lutz, MTN News.
Now, Bullock also says there's no evidence showing prison sentences do much to discourage crimes. He says increasing the severity of punishment is ineffective in many of these cases. Well, now we'll turn things over to Ed in the Weather Center. Ed, it was a beautiful day yesterday, but it sounds like we're in for kind of some more spring-like weather here soon.
That's right. You know, the spring weather in Montana means we got to change eventually. And yesterday we were hitting highs well into the 70s and 80s. We're on track to hit more of them today. Maybe not as warm as 86 yesterday in Billings. That was the warmest in the state. Upper 70s along the high line, but we also brought in some thunderstorms along with that. Now the trend as we start looking into next week is for cooler than average temperatures. There's about a 50 to 60% chance that the temperatures will be cooler than average in the western portion of the country. And at the same time, we're looking at generally wetter than average conditions, as you can see across much of the western and central portions of the state. And that includes about a 50% chance of cooler or wetter than average conditions across Montana, northern Wyoming. Forecast up in just a little bit.
All right, thanks, Ed. It's been a long time coming, but water is being pumped out of the Berkeley Pit in Butte to stop the rise of the toxic water. MTN's John Amy gives us a look at that project.
For 37 years, the toxic water in Butte's Berkeley Pit has been rising. But a new pumping system at Montana Resources that went online last week has put a stop to the rising water.
The whole Berkeley Pit system's been filling up with water flowing into it since 1982. Since last week, that's the first time that the Berkeley Pit system has not had a net inflow of water into it.
2 pumping stations recently installed at MR are pulling water from the pit and taking some of that water to the Horseshoe Bend treatment plant and the rest to the tailings impoundment for temporary storage.
We measure as inflow to the Berkeley Pit is about 2.8 million gallons a day. So we're pumping 3 million gallons per day right now, and we'll see what impact that has.
The Atlantic Richfield Company, which started the Berkeley Pit, is building a polishing plant off Continental Drive to help purify some of the pit water and remove it from the Montana Resources property.
They're building a series of filters that water comes out of the tailings impoundment, goes to their filter plant, gets its final polishing, final filtration, and then goes to Silverbow Creek.
The polishing plant is expected to be ready by July. In Butte, John Amy, MTN News.
Now, John tells us Montana Resources and Atlantic Richfield were ordered to stop the rising pit water by 2023. In other news this afternoon, a mascot and school colors chosen for the new Gallatin High School in Bozeman. The popular choice, the Raptors, as in the prehistoric dinosaur. It was an overwhelming favorite with the students. The Mountaineers took a close second, trailing in the final vote by just 17 votes. And the winning colors was an overwhelming vote for black and royal blue. Well, coming up here on the noon news, more retaliatory tariffs out of China as the trade war continues to escalate. Those details when we come back. But first, another beautiful day around much of the state. What's in store for the rest of the week? Ed will have that in his full forecast right after the break.
You're watching MTN News with Samantha Sullivan, Storm Tracker Weather with Ed McIntosh, and Farm and Ranch News from the Montana Ag Network. This is the Noon News on Q2, Montana's news leader.